Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. It is time to check out the most affordable of the new K-SKU 13th Gen parts, the Core i5-13600K. And I'm very excited for this CPU as the 12600K was a personal favorite of mine. So with the 13600K promising even better gaming performance and significantly better productivity performance, it should be a real winner. But before we jump into the benchmarks, today's video is brought to you by Naraka Bladepoint, a melee combat battle royale game that features fast-paced melee combat, insane mobility, and a vast arsenal of melee weapons. Naraka has pioneered a unique combination of melee weapons and hero skills in the battle royale genre, offering limitless combat possibilities. Unlike a typical shooter, there's a real need to predict your enemy's next attack and use the corresponding moves to counter them. And being an avid Fortnite player, I enjoy that aspect a lot. Mobility seems rather effortless in the game too, with an easy-to-use grappling hook and an array of unique hero skills like teleportation. Naraka hosts a range of customization options for your character, including CGI reconstructions of your own face, and each hero has its own unique skills which you can learn to master. My personal favourite was Taka G, who uses various fire abilities to give me the upper hand in a tough 1v1. With a commitment to the player base and ongoing support for the game, Naraka Bladepoint looks to be one of the best battle royales available. So click the link in the video description to try out Naraka Bladepoint and make sure to check it out between October 17th and November 1st to get a 50% discount on Xbox or for free on Xbox Game Pass. Okay, so let's start by going over the price, specs, and some configuration stuff. So for the price, Intel lists an MSRP of $330 US, though that's the per 1,000 unit price, but I'm happy to report that online retailers have been able to list it for $330. So that makes the 13600K just $30 more expensive than the Ryzen 5 7600X and $70 cheaper than the 5800X 3D. As for specifications, there are some noteworthy changes here when compared to its predecessor, the 12600K. Again, the P cores see an increase in L2 cache capacity to 2 MB, while the E cores see an even bigger upgrade. Not only are there twice as many at 8, but the L2 cache has been upgraded from 2 MB per cluster to 4 MB for a total of 8 MB. And even the L3 cache capacity has been bumped up, going from 20 MB to 24 MB. All said and done, the 13600K packs a massive 49% more cache than the 12600K. And not only that, but the peak core clock speed has also been increased by 4% from 4.9 GHz to 5.1 GHz. Moreover, the DDR5 memory support that's been improved from DDR5 4800 with the 12th gen to DDR5 5600 for the 13th gen, though for DDR4 we get the same 3200 support. There's also the same 16 lanes of PCI Express 5.0 and 4 lanes of PCIe 4.0 from the CPU. Now, something I need to touch on before we get into the review is power limits, or lack thereof. It's very important to note that although Intel claims a 181 watt max turbo power for the 13600K, that's not enforced, and by Intel's own guidance, it's not meant to be enforced. What this means is that all Z690 and Z790 motherboards run 12th and 13th Gen Core Series processors without any power limits in place. This has been an Intel issue for a long time now, and it's become an AMD issue as well. The Zen 4 CPUs run far more efficiently when power limited, sacrificing only a very small amount of performance for significantly lower power consumption, which results in lower operating temperatures. But this isn't out-of-the-box performance, as both AMD and Intel are gunning for top spot. Anyway, we didn't power limit the AMD AM4 CPUs, so we're not going to do so for Intel. Rather, we'll focus on showing you what the default behavior is. So that's all the important specification changes and information. Now let's go over the test system specs and then we'll get into the benchmarks. For the AM4 platform, I've got a range of Zen 2 and Zen 3 CPUs, and all have been tested using 32GB of DDR4 3600CL14 dual rank memory on the MSI MPG X570S Carbon Max Wi-Fi motherboard running the latest BIOS. The AM5 test system is based on the MSI MEG X670E Ace using 32GB of DDR5 6000CL30 memory, and of course all 4 Zen 4 CPUs have been included for this comparison. Also included for comparison are some Intel 10th gen processors, including the popular Core i5, i7 and i9 models, and due to time we did skip the 11th gen as we've done for all of these reviews. Then for the 12th and 13th gen core series, I've tested using DDR4 3600 dual rank CL14 memory and DDR5 6400 single rank CL32 memory. Now, all of this testing has been updated for this review, so all the game data is fresh. About 2 weeks ago, I set out on a mission to upgrade all of our CPU data using the NVIDIA GeForce RTX 4090, and I've provided 1080p and 1440p data, so there is a lot to go over. Also, please note we're using Windows 11 and Restyle Toolbar was enabled for all test configurations. Okay, let's get into it. Just quickly before we dive into the blue bar graphs, here's a look at clock behavior in Cinebench R23. After an hour of load testing, the 13600K maintained an all-core frequency of 4.9 GHz for the P cores and 3.9 GHz for the E cores, and this is down from 5.1 GHz for the P cores when the CPU is cool. So we still saw a 4% decline in operating frequency due to thermal throttling. On that note, this frequency was sustained using the MSI Core Liquid S360 360mm liquid cooler installed inside the MSI Prospect 700R case. Then, for single-core workloads, the 13600K appeared to maintain a clock frequency of 5.1 GHz under load, so the advertised frequency was achieved in this test. Starting with the Cinebench R23 Multi-core results, we see that the 13600K is good for a score of roughly 24,000 points after a 10-minute loop, making it a whopping 54% faster than the 7600X, an embarrassing margin there for AMD, and a quick indication that productivity is going to be a one-sided battle. The single-core performance of those P cores is also very good, as the 13600K managed to nudge ahead of the 12900K and 7700X, making it a few percent faster than the 7600X. This again suggests that, best case, the 7600X will only be able to match the 13600K in productivity benchmarks, and even then, that'll be a rare occurrence. Now, firing up the 7-zip file manager compression benchmark again sees the 13600K easily dominating the 7600X, delivering 36% greater performance, and that places it alongside the likes of the 5950X and 12700K, so not bad for the new $330 processor. Not bad at all. The decompression results are more favorable for AMD, but even so, the new Core i5 still easily defeats the 7600X by a convincing 20% margin, and is only 7% slower than the 7700X. Moving over to the Blender Open Data benchmark, we find that the 13600K is almost 40% faster than the 7600X, completing this workload in just 625 seconds, opposed to 862 seconds, so yet another comfortable win for Intel's new Core i5 processor. It's even worse in Corona, as the 13600K fares even better on short burst workloads. Here it was 51% faster than the 7600X, completing the task in just 61 seconds, making it slightly faster than even the 12700K, and roughly on par with the Ryzen 9 5900X. Even in Premiere Pro, the 13600K led the 7600X, this time by an 11% margin, and that saw it match the 5950X with a score of 1084 points. Now, here's a rare example of the 7600X outpacing the 13600K in a productivity workload, though performance overall was much the same with just 4% in it. Both managed to deliver 12700K-like performance, so needless to say both CPUs are very fast here. The 13600K managed to jump ahead in the After Effects benchmark, leading the 7600X by a reasonably slim 6% margin. Now, the last application benchmark we have for you looks at code compilation performance, and here the 13600K is comfortably back out in front of the 7600X, winning this test by a 16% margin, coming in just behind the 5900X. Okay, so now it's time for some gaming benchmarks, and we'll start with Factorio. Here the 13600K and 7600X are surprisingly close, but I guess that makes sense as the E-cores aren't particularly useful here. In fact, they're pretty well useless. This allowed the 7600X to take the lead, albeit by a very slim margin. Next up, we have Watch Dogs Legion at 1080p, and please note I have all the 1440p data, but rather than go over all of that here, as it is quite similar to the 1080p results as seen in the 1300K review, I'll just show you the 1440p average after we've gone over all the game data individually. So here we see that the 13600K is good for 163 FPS on average using DDR5 memory, or 137 FPS with DDR4, and that means the DDR5 memory was 19% faster, which is a significant difference. This also means when using DDR5, the 13600K was 5% faster than the 7600X. Not a huge margin, but still a win here for Intel. The 13600K also wasn't much slower than the 7700X, as it managed to match the previous generation flagship 12900K, so very impressive stuff here. Now here we see in Rainbow Six Siege Extraction that DDR5 memory is of little benefit, but even so the 7600X was 8% faster than the 13600K and a massive 21% faster when comparing 1% lows. Still, as disappointing as those margins may be, the performance on offer here from the 13600K is pretty mighty, and I doubt many of you will scoff at over 400 FPS on average. The 7600X also came out ahead in Hitman 3, though only by a very slim margin. We're talking just 4% here. So really, performance is much of a muchness in this title, and the 13600K was just 6% slower than the 13900K. The new Core i5 processor did get the better of the 7600X in Far Cry 6, boosting 1% lows by 8%, despite both of them delivering the same 180 FPS on average. So again, performance really was much the same here, and it certainly won't matter which of these CPUs is used for playing this title. The 13600K also edged out the 7600X in F122, boosting the average frame rate by 3% and the 1% lows by a much more significant 10%. Of course, both CPUs delivered more than enough performance in this title, and it was impressive to see the 13600K matching the 12900K. Now, despite the 13900K completely dominating in Spider-Man Remastered, the 13600K wasn't nearly as impressive, with just 118 FPS on average, meaning it could only roughly match the 7600X, though truth be told it wasn't much slower than the 13700K, so overall I think it's probably fair to say that the result is quite good. The new Core i5 was a bit more dominant in shot of the Tomb Raider, and although it only knocked off the 7600X by a 4% margin when comparing the average frame rate, it was a much more convincing 12% faster when looking at the 1% lows. The 13600K gets steamrolled in Horizon Zero Dawn by a 28% margin in favour of the 7600X. It's bizarre how well the Zen 4 CPUs perform in this game. It's certainly an outlier in our limited 12-game testing, but a strong result for AMD all the same. The 13600K and 7600X were far more competitive in Cyberpunk 2077, basically delivering identical performance, making them comparable with the 7950X, 7900X, 7700X, and 12900K. The 7600X did outgun the 13600K by a slim margin in ACC. We're only talking about a 4% margin, though overall they are very similar. So in short, the 13600K was a fraction faster than the 12900K and only slightly slower than the 13700K. The 13600K wins the Riftbreaker benchmark when armed with DDR5 memory, beating the 7600X by a 6% margin with an average of 190 FPS, making it just a fraction slower than the 7700X, 13700K, and 13900K. Finally, we have the Counter-Strike Global Offensive results, and a bit like Horizon Zero Dawn, this is a game where the 7600X easily beats the 13600K, though the margins aren't nearly as extreme at 13%. We also see that the 13600K was slightly slower than the 12900K, but faster than the 12700K, so a good result when compared to the previous generation Core i7 and i9 parts. Here's a look at the 12-game average data at 1080p, and here we see that the 7600X did come out on top, at least when comparing the average frame rate, where it was a mere 3% faster. That said though, the 1% lows were identical at 175 FPS, but I guess the point is, overall, the gaming experience is virtually identical using either CPU. The 13600K did drop off a little with the DDR4 3600CL14 memory, but we're only talking about a mere 6% decline for the average frame rate, and an 8% decline for the 1% lows. Of course, at times the margins were quite significant, so it will depend on the games used for testing. Then at 1440p, we're seeing much the same. The 7600X was 4% faster when comparing the average frame rate, but no faster for the 1% lows. In short, the 13600K was comparable to the 12900K, and a bit faster than the 12700K, so a very positive comparison there for the new Core i5 processor. Now for all-core workloads, and like all 13th gen processors, the 13600K is a bit of a pig on power, pushing total system usage to 315 watts, which certainly isn't crazy, but it's a little over 70 watts more than the 5900X for slightly less performance. It's also slightly more than the 7900X, despite the Zen 4 part being almost 90% faster, so power efficiency isn't great here, but it is manageable, and that's about the most positive thing you can say. Now, using the MSI Core Liquid S360 360mm liquid cooler, the 13600K peaked at TJ max after less than a minute of all-core load, so 100 degrees Celsius. That said, despite running extremely hot, this only reduced the all-core frequency by 200 MHz from 5.1 GHz at the start of our test to 4.9 GHz once we hit TJ max. So while quite annoying, it doesn't have a significant impact on performance. Oddly, this is slightly worse than the result we received with the 13700K, And I should note that by default, the 13600K ran at a sustained package power of 186 watts with a peak package power of 200 watts. Now, if we load the 181 watt profile in the MSI BIOS, this reduces the PL1 and PL2 rating to 181 watts. Though interestingly, the package power maxed out at 154 watts and typically hovered at about 145 watts for long duration testing. This lowered the sustained P-core frequency from 4.9 GHz to 4.7 GHz, so a 4% drop there, and an 8% drop from the peak of 5.1 GHz when running without power limits. This lower power target did drop the peak operating temperature to 87 degrees, which is a nice improvement over stock. And for those of you running a lot of all-core workloads, this is a more optimal configuration in my opinion, but of course, you are leaving some performance on the table. Moving on to our cost per frame analysis, we'll start by comparing just the cost of the CPU. This gives the 7600X an advantage over the 13600K as it provides the same level of gaming performance while costing $30 less. Of course, for a more accurate comparison, we do need to include the platform costs, so let's go do that. Now, when factoring in the cost of the memory and motherboard, things look quite different. The 13600K is clearly better value than the 7600X right now. With both running quality DDR5 memory, the Core i5 processor came in at a cost reduction of 7% per frame, which is a reasonably significant margin. Perhaps more crucially is the fact that this made the 13600K the best value part on the market right now, muscling out even the 5800X 3D and 5600X. And as mentioned in the 13900K review, I'm aware that you can get much cheaper DDR4 memory, but it will also reduce performance. So that kind of breaks this cost per frame analysis as it muddles with our data. I'd have to revisit parts like the 3600X and 5800X 3D with sweet spot DDR4 3600CL16 memory to see how they stack up, and I'm sure that's something we can do in the near future. Well, as expected, the Core i5-13600K is a much more practical and better value CPU than not just the 13900K, but also the 13700K, particularly when focusing on gaming. At the high end, I feel strong arguments can be made for both Raptor Lake and Zen 4, but towards the lower end of the still very much mid-range market, it looks as though Intel has AMD comfortably beaten. Sure, the power consumption isn't great, and without some power limiting, the thermals are a bit ugly, but for gaming, a 150 watt package power limit shouldn't have a big impact. Realistically, you should see similar results to what's been shown in this review, if not the exact same results. And to be clear, the 7600X and 13600K are extremely evenly matched when it comes to gaming performance. There's certainly no clear winner here, but the 13600K package is cheaper overall, largely thanks to the availability of already established Z690 motherboards. Now, although you can save even more money by opting for DDR4, and perhaps DDR4 3600CL16 will be the way to go there, sacrificing only a small amount of performance compared to what's been shown here, we are seeing more and more examples in modern games where DDR5 can make a serious performance difference. So for those of you building a new system, paying the premium might be worth it in the long run, but either way, you have the option of either DDR4 or DDR5 with the 13600K, making it a far more flexible product. Then there's the issue of productivity where the 7600X gets completely steamrolled, and this is a big problem for AMD. Even when limited to a package power of 150 watts, which reduces the performance by around 7%, the 13600K still outpaced the 7600X by over 40% in Cinebench R23, and this power limit doesn't affect lightly threaded performance, just core-heavy workloads. So no matter which way you slice it, the 7600X gets embarrassed by the 13600K in productivity benchmarks. It's a complete reversal of what we saw just a few generations ago, where AMD walloped Intel with their 16-core desktop parts up against Intel's 8 and 10-core models. Basically, AMD is in a position where they have to discount the 7600X down towards $200 in order to compete in anything outside of gaming. And not only that, but AMD needs quality sub-$200 AM5 motherboards for the 7600X to make sense, even if they were to discount the CPU down to around $200 US. So that is a really brutal matchup there for AMD's new 6-core Zen 4 processor. As enticing as the AM5 platform is with its promise of continued support, if I were building a new PC today for either gaming or work, I'd be going with the Core i5-13600K. It's just the obvious choice in my opinion, just as the 12600K was back when we reviewed it in late 2021. And that is going to do it for this review. if you liked it, you know what to do. Subscribe for more content. There'll be many more big benchmarks surrounding all these new 13th gen and Zen 4 CPUs, and of course new GPUs and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, make sure you're subscribed. Also, if you'd like to get more Hardware Unboxed goodness, we have Floatplane Patreon. The links for those are in the video description. You get access to our monthly live stream. Tim and I get together and chat and answer questions, do all that stuff live. We have a Discord chat thing, Discord community, really cool place to hang out and talk about tech and, well, a lot of other things. I'll leave it at that, but a lot of things happen on Discord. Behind the scenes content, Tim's got a new studio, a lot of cool coverage there, and Q&As. So anyway, a lot of cool stuff there at Floatplane and Patreon, but if I can't interest you in that, then that is perfectly fine. And what I would like to do is thank you for watching this video, especially if you made it all the way to the end here. Good job. Thank you very much. I'm your host, Steve. See you next time.